Hi guys, Loz here. This is the second video in my French learning series where I'm documenting how I'm learning French using what was the MIA method, but unfortunately as of around a month ago at the time of making this video, the MIA method has essentially been disbanded. So probably by the time I make the next video, Matt versus Japan, who essentially created the method that I'm following, will have rebranded, and so I'll be following whatever method he was using. So my last video was quite a bit longer than I was kind of hoping it would be. I was kind of hoping to keep it around half an hour, but it ended up being nearly an hour. This video is going to be quite long as well, I think, but hopefully it will be quite informative. Last time I was just kind of going off the cuff, but this time I have made some notes, so hopefully it will be a little bit more structured. So I'm going to talk about basically what happened in the last around about 2 months since I made the last video, how my progress has been, what I've done. I'll show some stats, and yeah, that's basically what I'm going to talk about. So essentially, since my last video, I had a period of around a month, around 3.5 weeks to a month, which you can see on my Anki Stats as this period here, where I basically, for all intents and purposes, I wasn't really studying French. So in actuality, even though it has been 2 months since my last video, I'm only really going to count it as 1 month in terms of like actual French study, because unfortunately you can see there's this month period where I basically didn't do anything. So the reason for this was pretty much shortly after I made my last video. My sleeping pattern was really bad. So I was going to sleep at, let's say, I don't know, 9 a.m, 10 a.m, and waking up sometime in the kind of mid-afternoon. And I decided shortly after that video that I was going to make a change, and I was going to try and get back onto a more regular sleeping pattern. So what that entailed was me basically trying to stay up all night and then go to sleep at a regular time. But for whatever reason, that didn't work. And so for a period of around 2.5 weeks, I was basically trying and failing to fix my sleeping pattern. So I was getting by on maybe 3-4 hours of sleep for most of that period. And that made me unable to function pretty much. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't really do anything. And that's borne out in these stats, really. Essentially, I kept up with my Anki, luckily. So you can see I'm still doing my reviews on pretty much every day. Some days I didn't do as many reviews, and some days I didn't do any reviews. But for the most part, I kept up with my Anki, and I made sure when I was ready to come back into it that my Anki was still up to date, and so that I could just jump straight back in. So this period here, while I was still doing stuff in French, I was still watching things in French, I still had my phone in French, I was still looking at things in French, it was very limited in the amount that I was actually doing. Anki was most of what I was doing over this period. So for all intents and purposes, it's effectively this last month is where I've been the most consistent. You can see I'm pretty consistent. I've only had a few days where I haven't done anything. This day here, there's some problem where it doesn't quite detect what days you've added cards. So I didn't add that many on this day, like half of that amount is probably on this day. This day is the only one where I haven't added any new cards, and I think that was because this day here was my biggest day. So I was a bit burnt out after that day, so this day I didn't want to add any. But from my stats, you can see I've been pretty consistent over the last month. So this video really is just going to talk about what I've done in this last month. I'm effectively going to ignore this period here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is what is probably the most famous book in French, and is basically what everyone recommends that you should read when you first start learning French, is Le Petit Prince. So right off the bat, this is going to be quite a controversial opinion, but I really did not enjoy this book at all. So this book is, like I said, generally people advise you to read this as one of the first books when you're learning French. I would say don't do that at all. Like, I would highly recommend not doing that. So this isn't really a children's book. It's very metaphorical, and it feels like it's written for adults. Like, I actually went through after reading this in French and read big sections of it in English, just because I just wasn't getting it. I didn't really understand. And then I didn't get it the same in English as well. It's extremely metaphorical. So basically, it's written like a children's book. So everything is fantastical. Like, there isn't really a plot. Like, it's just lots of different scenarios that don't really make sense and don't really link together. Just like a children's book, really. There isn't really a logical plot. It's just lots of crazy things happening and lots of weird stuff. However, there is a lot of metaphors. It's meant to relate to a lot of things in real life and be very philosophical. So those aspects, for me personally, I found it very, very hard to follow. Even when I read the English version, I found it, obviously it was easy for me to read, but I found it very hard to follow. And for me personally, if I'm getting invested in something, it needs to have a coherent plot, and it needs to be something that's quite logical and it needs to be a plot that kind of makes sense. And Le Petit Prince really just doesn't make sense. So this was my first novel that I read in French. So I think in the last video, I think I'd gotten maybe a third of the way through or a quarter of the way through. So this is my first experience diving into novels. So I had to deal with the fact that it has an incoherent plot that doesn't really make much sense, compounded with the fact that this is my first delving into passé simple, which is the literary form of the past tense. So I had to get used to that. I had to get used to more literary ways of writing, which is quite different to the spoken way, which was basically the only way that I've been learning up until now. So I had to get used to those two things, on top of the fact that there was a story that didn't really make much sense. So when I went through and read bits of it in English, which I did after reading, I found that I wasn't really misunderstanding anything. Like, I thought it was just because my French isn't very good and that I'm getting used to all of these different abilities, and that almost every single sentence in this is I+3, I+4. Like, I was having to look up things constantly, every single sentence, several words. I thought that was the reason why I was really struggling to get through, but that wasn't the only reason. When I read through it in English, it was equally as incomprehensible to me. So that didn't help. It also has a lot of strange words for things. It's not that strange. There's not that many. Mostly it is just normal words, but there's a couple of strange things and strange words that are used in it that I think is kind of just to be like the more poetic way that it's written, and I don't really appreciate that, because like it made me at a certain point, once I encountered these words, it made me stop wanting to look things up. It didn't give me confidence in wanting to look things up. So after a certain point, I stopped looking as many words up, and I was just kind of trying to just get through it, just to get to the end, just to get it over and done with. And in hindsight, that probably wasn't the best thing to do. Like, it probably wasn't the best use of my time, just struggling to try and force myself to get through this. I mean, maybe it was, because now that I'm reading other books, like Harry Potter, for example, it is easier because I have struggled through reading this. Like, I'm pretty used to passé simple now. It's a very easy conjugation. It's not difficult to spot. So it did help me with that, but I mean, I would much rather have dived into a different kind of story than this when I was starting, and I would recommend against this as your first book. Maybe have it as like maybe the third or fourth book once you're a bit used to these other elements and it's not too overwhelming. But for me personally, I can't recommend this book at all. So after finishing Le Petit Prince, which was one of the first things that I did, I mean, I just wanted to kind of get it over and done with, so I kind of rushed through the last maybe 3 or 4 chapters just to get it done. After doing Le Petit Prince, I started taking some B1 sample tests. I just wanted to kind of gauge roughly where my ability is. Now, I don't really subscribe to the kind of European framework, the A1 to C2 leveling system for your ability. I don't think it's that useful, but I just wanted to do it. So I took a few B1 tests, and for me personally, the ones that I took, I got between 80% and 100% on all of them. So I could only take reading and listening, obviously. But they really didn't seem very difficult to me at all. They seemed pretty easy. The listening was harder than the reading for me personally, because I don't think I've done as much listening as I probably should have. But they were pretty easy for me to do. So for me personally, I need to constantly be seeing that my level is improving, and I need constant reinforcement of where my level is, and I'm getting that through the content that I'm reading mostly, but I just wanted to see like how I fit onto this framework, and so I think I'm somewhere in between the B1 and B2 level. Like currently I think I'm somewhere in that frame. in terms of listening and reading, obviously speaking, I still can't say anything. Well, I haven't tried, but I doubt I can say anything in French really. So I did those tests. That gave me some confidence. So the next thing that I did, which has taken up probably most of my time during the last month, has been that I started playing a game called No Kuni. So this isn't a French game. So I'll bring it up over here. This isn't a French game. It's actually a Japanese game. But it's an RPG, and I started playing this pretty much at this time last month. So I've been playing it for pretty much a month. So you can see here, this is how many hours I've played, 111.1 hours. So you can see I've spent a considerable amount of time on this game. So unfortunately, it is a Japanese game. So all of the voice acting is in either Japanese or English. So to avoid any kind of crossover, I put it into Japanese. Unfortunately, I could understand a fair bit of the Japanese. So that did give me a little bit of an advantage, but not much of this game is voice acted. Most of it is just text. But I mean, I've spent considerable amount of time in this game. This is the game where I think I've probably spoke to the most people out of any other game that I've ever played. So the reason it's this length of time is, for one, obviously in the beginning it was quite hard and I was looking things up all the time. But I went out of my way to speak to pretty much every single NPC. I did pretty much every side quest. Like, the only things that I haven't done in this game are the really grindy things that I didn't want to waste my time on. Pretty much everything else in this game I've done. Like, I've talked to pretty much everyone. Like, I would love to know how many words I've read from this game. It must be a few 100,000. Because literally, I've been speaking to so many things in this game I've done. Also in this game, there's a book inside. It's like a magician's manual kind of thing. And it's very detailed. It's got like maybe 200 pages, something like that. And there's lots and lots and lots of text in that. So I've spent probably, I don't know, probably at least 5-10 hours, maybe more, maybe 15 hours, just reading through that book. It really is fantastic. Like, it feels like you're reading a proper book, because there's loads and loads and loads of prose and stuff. So that's a great advantage. So I think I'm going to probably continue this trend of playing RPGs. While obviously I'm not getting any listening practice, so this is only to replace reading. And obviously it's not as good as, let's say, if I'd spent all of this 100 hours reading, just reading books, I would have got significantly more like actual reading time out of it. But for me personally, it's better because I can spend much longer on this. Like, I can happily spend 7-8 hours in a day just sitting down and playing on this game. Like, there's no way I could spend that long purely reading a book, because obviously it's not text the entire time. I'd probably say maybe only half of this was actually me reading text. Maybe a little bit over half, and the rest of it was just playing the game and doing the battle system and stuff. But that breaking it up, like, I'll have several periods where I'm just reading non-stop for maybe like 5-10 minutes where I'm reading the story, and then it'll be broken up with like another 5 minutes or 10 minutes of like wandering around finding out where I've got to go. So that breaking it up means that I can stay with it for much longer. Like, it's got like a natural built-in break from the prose, whereas with Harry Potter or like whatever book I'm reading, I can read like maybe a few pages and then I have to take a break because I'm a little bit burnt out, and then I'll come back maybe an hour later and I'll read a little bit more, and then that'll be me done for the day. So effectively I'm probably only getting 2-3 hours like max if I'm reading a book. With this, like, I can go way longer, and it's got these natural little breaks. So it seems to have worked really well. And you can see if I go to Anki, if I see how many cards I've got out of No Kuni, I have made 240 cards from No Kuni. So I've got a lot of cards out of this, and every single one has got like a screenshot. So when I see the particular phrase, it takes me right back to where I was in the game, and I'm very attached to these cards. All of these cards are very high quality. Fortunately, obviously, they're not native. They have no native audio, but in terms of what I'm getting out of the card, it feels very it feels very high quality, because I almost never forget a card that I've seen from No Kuni because of that. So I'm very happy with No Kuni. I'm very happy with studying through games in general. Another thing is that when you're playing a game, you have to understand what's going on. Otherwise, you can't play the game. You have to understand what the objective is, where you've got to go, especially on an RPG. Like, you have to understand what the tasks are. And in this game has got hundreds of side quests, and each have their own individual little task. And you have to figure out what they are, where you've got to go, what you've got to do, like whether you've got to kill these certain monsters in a particular way. Whether you've got to go and find this particular item. There's puzzles that you have to do, so I had to figure out some puzzles, which was quite interesting. And yeah, so I highly recommend playing computer games personally. It seemed to work very, very well for me. And I don't think I would have been able to spend this amount of time over this period just purely reading. I think I would have burnt out if I did that. So it's worked out very nicely. So the next thing that I've been doing in the last month is this. It's the InnerFrench podcast. So while I was in my period of around 2.5 weeks where I wasn't getting any sleep, I came across this YouTube channel. So I have a YouTube channel that's only in French. I only ever log into it on a VPN that's in France, and I have everything set to French, so only French things come up. And weirdly enough, even though this is aimed at English speakers, I managed to find this channel, and then I managed to find his podcast. This is absolutely excellent. So when I was studying Japanese, this is something that I was looking for, and I never found. But it's basically intermediate level content that's really interesting, that is comprehensible input for when you're not quite a beginner, so you don't want stuff that's purposely dumbed down, but you just want stuff that's kind of to branch the gap between being a beginner and then going full native, especially in terms of listening. So I discovered this podcast. He's done quite a few episodes. I think he's done in the 80s number of episodes, but his voice is extremely easy to understand. He doesn't use very complicated words. He does use some complicated words, but he always explains them. If they're like low frequency words, he'll always explain what they mean. But he talks about all different topics under the sun, just things that interest him. And I've actually learned quite a lot about a bunch of different topics from him in French, even though the level isn't super advanced. Like, he's not mumbling, he's not using speech, he's not speaking full speed. But in terms of learning words, I've learned lots and lots of words from Hugo. So if I just pull up this and I go to InnerFrench, you can see that. So I've made 56 cards, and I've probably listened to 10-15 podcasts. So it's not too bad, really. But essentially, the way that I study this is so to begin with, I just put it on. I was listening to maybe 1 or 2 a day, where I just left it on in the background, and then I sat down, or I went and laid on my bed while it was on, and I was listening to it, and I found that I could understand almost everything. It was very easy for me to understand, and there was virtually nothing that I missed. So I just used it as listening practice to begin with, but then I basically thought that this is a little bit too easy. I don't know what I'm actually getting from this. If I want to get listening practice, I probably want to listen to something a bit harder, because this is really, really easy for me to understand. So I started studying each of these podcasts fully, so that I understood 100%, so that every single little word and every single little thing I understood. So the way that I did that is I used LingQ. So LingQ is another thing that I've picked up. So this is LingQ. So LingQ is an application that's been created by Steve Kaufman, who is one of the most popular polyglots. I don't know how many languages he's learned, but it's around 20, I think, or maybe upwards of 20 languages that he speaks fluently. So he's a very legit polyglot. And he created this application. He's very input focused, which is great, which is how I want to learn. So it's basically a way of processing input in a more efficient way. So when I studied Japanese, I used this add-on here called Yomi-chan. So what this add-on does is, if you're on a website that's in Japanese, like this one, for example, Let's say I wanted to read this. What you do is you basically hover over it and you just press a button and it shows you what that means. It shows you exactly what that word means. So it's an extremely fast way of looking stuff up. And this is intelligent enough that it can pick out, even if you don't know exactly where the word starts, this is intelligent enough where it'll just pick out what it thinks the word is. Because I don't use this anymore, I haven't really got any of my dictionaries in here, but you can plug in whatever dictionary you want in here. You can plug in like Japanese only dictionaries, you can plug in custom English dictionaries. There are some that it gives you to install, and that's these two here. But so what I essentially did was I'd have the monolingual dictionary at the top, and then I'd have to scroll down to see what it is in English, and that seemed to work pretty good for me. So pretty much all content that I was consuming in Japanese was in a browser. So I had loads of books, I had loads of novels in a browser, and I'd read them this way. So I'd go through, if there's a word that I don't understand, I'd hover over it, and then okay, I'd look to see if I understand what the monolingual definition is. Okay, I don't really get that, so I scroll down and then, okay, I understand what that is now. So that was the primary way that I learned words in Japanese, and it just made life much easier. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything that could do this. I couldn't find an equivalent add-on for French. I mean, one would think it would be easier for French because words are split up by spaces, so you shouldn't need as sophisticated an algorithm to detect where words are and things. Like, you might need a deconjugator to deconjugate verbs and things like that, but you would expect that it wouldn't be as hard, but I couldn't find an equivalent add-on. So this is what led me to LingQ. So I have been using LingQ for a few weeks now, maybe almost 2 weeks. Originally, I wanted to try it for a while free, but LingQ is pretty much unusable when it's free. So I'm not sure exactly what you get when it's free. I think you can only make 20 links though, or 20 or 30 links, which is essentially new words that you learn. And you'll max that out straight away. So what LingQ is, so I'll show what LingQ is. So you essentially have lessons, which is just content. It's just any content. It can be a podcast, it can be a book, whatever. So you see I've got InnerFrench. I've got lots of InnerFrench lessons. And what it will do is it will show you, so it has the number of words that it thinks that you know. So these are all words that I've told it that I know. It's 4,200. And then what it does is on each lesson it shows you that's how many new words there are to learn, and that's how many of them are unique, basically. And then these are my links that are in this. So if I go on in a French podcast, so these have all been created by people in the community. This isn't LingQ actually creating it. Someone has created this. Because InnerFrench is obviously publicly available, there's no issues here. So if I click on a lesson, like let's say this is one that I'd listened to. So I listened to maybe the first 15 or so before LingQ, and then I've gone through and intensively studied, I don't know how many, like maybe 4 or 5 of them. I clicked on the wrong one. So if I click on one that I haven't done, what it essentially does, if I go back to the beginning, is you see how this is all white? That's because I know every word on this page, basically. When you know a word, it doesn't show up. If I want to look up what a word means, I just click on it, and it gives me it reads it out using a really poor text-to-speech, and then it gives you some basic translations that the community of LingQ have kind of given to that word, and then you can search these. So I've added these two monolingual ones because that's all I'm interested in, and you can look up the word that way. So what would have been better for me is if this wasn't the community, if it just pulled the definition from Larousse and put it in here. That would be much better for me personally, because I don't want to see any English. Once I get to a certain point, I don't really want to see any English. But I mean, it's effectively doing the thing that I used to do in Japanese, but it's not quite as good, but it gets me there. So this is how I use LingQ. It has an added benefit of, let's say if I go to another page, these ones in blue is a word that I've never seen before in the context of LingQ. So I obviously know what that means. Obviously know what that means as well. Public holiday, but like these words, LingQ doesn't know that I know. So psychologically it's really good because you can read through And I know in the back of my mind that these are all words that I know, so I don't have to concentrate as hard. I mean, I'm still concentrating, I'm still trying to read everything here, but like when I'm reading through this, like there's something psychological that just makes reading things in LingQ a little bit easier, a little bit more palatable, and that's really important for me personally. Like it makes me want to read a lot more things. Just it gives me a lot more confidence if I see a page and there's only a few little bits of blue on it, that I know all of these words. And then a lot of these blue ones I end up knowing as well. Like I know that that's an event, I know that that's like a national event. So let's say I didn't know what public holiday was. What you do is you click on one of these translations, and then this then gets turned yellow, and that's what's called a link. So these are words that you didn't know that you've looked up. So what I'll usually do is, if it's in an I+1 sentence, I'll copy this whole sentence, and I'll so you can hear the terrible text-to-speech. So I will copy this whole sentence and I'll make a card out of this sentence. But if I didn't know public holiday, for example. So something like that is how I use LingQ personally. So it has an SRS that you can do at the end of each lesson. You can SRS all of your links, and then it gets better over time. But I don't really want to do that. I mean, I've already got a great SRS with Anki, so I don't really want to do that. And another thing, if you turn the page, for example, so if I go to the next page, all the ones that were blue automatically get turned to known words. So you don't have to go through and click on every single word. It'll automatically just assume that you know all of the rest of the words that you haven't turned into links, and it'll add them. So that's great. So there are a lot of downsides to LingQ. It's not perfect. So this UI isn't great to use. I mean, it's not brilliant. It messes up quite a lot, and you can't copy things directly. If you want to, if I want to copy this sentence, for example, I'll have to get the full text here and kind of search for it in here and copy it out of here. You can't copy things directly from here. It doesn't let you. So that's very annoying. Another thing, like I said earlier, is if I wanted to know what this word meant, for example, I don't really want to see the English. I want to see the French first. That's just the way that I learn. I always have the French first, and then if I don't understand the French, that's when I'll go to the English. So this is, over time, this is going to get less and less and less useful for me, because I don't really want to be doing many of my lookups in English. So that's a downside. Another thing is that there aren't actually that many LingQ-specific content. Like, most of it is being created by the community, or you can import your own stuff in. So there's the ability up here. You can see you can import an ebook. So I've imported into my lessons, I've imported Harry Potter, and that's where I've been reading Harry Potter. But there isn't actually that much content. Like, most of it is just freely available content that people have created these lessons from. There's not actually that much stuff that's just specific to LingQ. And LingQ is a premium product, so LingQ does cost quite a lot of money. I think it's somewhere around $10 a month, something like that. It's very expensive. For what it is, it's far, far, far too expensive. Like, I'm pretty sure there's even a free thing that does all of this, like finding words and recognizing and clicking on them. I'm pretty sure there's an application that does that completely free. The only thing that makes this worthwhile, really, in any way, shape or form, is the fact that a lot of this work has already been done for you by the community, and also the fact that there's an app, and whenever you've done a lesson, it gets added to this playlist. The audio of that lesson gets added to this playlist. So you can see I've done one about chess. I've got one about like Aikido, I think that is, or Judo, maybe. I can't remember which martial art that was about. But you see, I've got these, and then what you can do is when you're like not doing anything, like you can just go onto your phone and you can play your playlist, and it'll go through and play this. Now, that doesn't work perfectly. I mean, it messes up a lot of the time. I couldn't get it to play on my phone for a while. It just wouldn't play any of these files for whatever reason. But that's where you're getting the benefit from, really, from LingQ. I personally, like, I didn't actually want to pay for it. I wanted to use it for free. And the way that you buy it, it's literally 2 clicks. You go on it, you click on the package, you click on PayPal, and as soon as you've clicked accept in PayPal, that's it. It's bought. So usually whenever I buy things, I get like a confirmation screen or something that will show me what I'm actually buying, and it will show me like whether I'm paying monthly or whether I'm just paying it in bulk. But no, this just went through. It just paid the whole thing in bulk for a year, and that was it. I was paid. I was a premium member. So I've paid for it now. I'm definitely going to use it. This is going to be a big part of, this is basically going to be how I read most things, I think, because reading is much more pleasurable. And this is how I'm going to consume pretty much all podcasts. There's YouTube videos that I'm going to import. So this is going to be a big way, probably apart from playing computer games, this is going to be the way that I learn French, like the most words through French. So I'm going to get use out of it. But I would say, if I was going to recommend this, the price point needs to change quite significantly for me to recommend this to anyone. So one last thing on Link that I wanted to show is my stats. So what I'm probably going to do is every month I'm probably going to show my stats on Link as well as my Anki Stats, just to show what I've been doing. There's a lot of gamification in Link, so there's like daily goals that you have, there's like streaks and things like that. You can see how much like listening you've been doing and stuff like that. So I'm not going to pay any attention to any of that. It's just purely this bit here, like how many new words I'm adding and how many links I'm adding. So you can see, since I've been using it, I know 4,288 words. So the actual words that I know is probably a fair bit higher than this, because I do still come across things that I know quite a lot. This learned words, these are essentially when I created a link, if it's in an I+1 sentence already, I'll copy that sentence, put it into Anki, and then I'll mark it as learned. So that's basically how I've been learning my words. Also, when I'm reading through, and there's a link that I see, but I can remember what it means, or I know what it means, and I don't have to look it up. Typically, if that happens, I'll mark it as learned as well. So I am learning stuff just naturally. I'm not just adding it all to Anki, which is quite nice, but I'm not using Link itself, like the SRS in Link, to learn new words. So I think this is useful. I mean, you'll basically be able to see how my known words goes up every day, how many new links I'm adding, stuff like that, how much I've read through Link. So ideally this will probably be a fair bit higher next month. And yeah, so I think this will be a useful thing to show every month. So one final thing that I've been doing is I've been watching things on Netflix. So a particular show that I've watched most of is Breaking Bad. So you see I'm on season 3, episode 4. So what I realized was that essentially I'm not getting enough listening practice. Nearly everything that I'm doing is reading. So I wanted to start watching at least 2 to 3 hours a day of something without subtitles. So I've been watching Breaking Bad only without subtitles. So you see I've got the subtitles disactivated. So this has actually been very, very difficult for me, because I just don't think I've been doing enough listening. So Breaking Bad, especially in the beginning, like it was quite a big shock to me, because I understood virtually nothing of what was being said. So partially I actually think that the sound levels on Breaking Bad, for whatever reason, they're just not very good. So like action and stuff will be boosted up super high, and the things that people are saying are boosted really, really low. So it's almost like they're whispering. So I have to turn the volume up, and like it's really weird. I can't really explain it. But if I listen with headphones on, or if I turn the volume up really high, like I can suddenly understand significantly more than if I just keep it at a level. So that's a weird thing that I've noticed. I think videos on YouTube, I don't really get this with videos on YouTube, because I think there's some kind of like audio normalization that happens. I'd love to see if I can get something for Netflix that can normalize the audio automatically, but I mean, maybe I'll just leave it, because real life is never going to be, everything's going to be perfectly clear. There's going to be lots of mumbling, there's going to be lots of like background noise and stuff, so maybe I'll just keep it as it is. It's good practice, but like a big part of the reason why I've struggled, obviously I haven't done much listening. They're speaking about topics that I don't know anything about in French, and it's very, very like slang. It's very, especially Jesse when he's speaking. If you know anything about Breaking Bad, he's basically like a young drug dealer kind of guy, and he speaks very, very slangy. He speaks very quickly, very mumbly. So it's been very difficult to understand. But I'm going to keep watching this. I'm going to finish Breaking Bad, and then I'm going to watch similar sorts of shows like Better Call Saul, and then other shows, hopefully at least an hour or two a day, to increase my listening ability. So to finish up the section of what I've done for the last month, I wanted to kind of go through my stats in Anki, and kind of show roughly what I've done. So one change that I did this month is that I've started turning more things into French, just so that I can get that little bit more exposure. So You can see here Anki's in French. It hasn't been any detriment to me whatsoever. I mean, I know all of these words, so there's been no detriment whatsoever. So it's been nice to change it into French. So if we look through my stats, so you can see essentially my progress has been, I had these big spots when I was learning from the textbook, where I could add like 40-50 sentences just because it was grammar stuff. Like now I've kept it pretty steady, so the darker the color is, the more that I've done. So you can see I've kind of settled down into, like, there's this band between like 60 and like maybe 90 reviews a day, where I'm sitting quite comfortably, like somewhere in this band here is where the vast majority of my my daily study has been. So I've been pretty consistent with how I've been studying. I don't set myself a goal every day. I don't set myself like I'm going to make sure I learn exactly 10 words a day or exactly 15 words a day or whatever. I don't set like a lower limit. I don't set an upper limit. I just when I'm doing content, if I see an I+1, I'll create a card there and then. That seems to work best for me. And then however many I get that day is however many I add. Typically it's somewhere in the 10 to 15 kind of range. Some days I've added closer to 20. Some days I've added a little bit under 10. But they seem to even out on a lot of days. Like I seem to get a lot that's kind of around the 75 sort of level. It just seems to naturally work its way out to that sort of level. And it's been working really well. And I think I'm going to continue this. I'm not going to set like a hard limit or set any like goals of what I've got to get every day, because I don't want to put too much stress. I want it to be like an enjoyable experience, because I think if it's an enjoyable experience and I'm not pushing myself too hard, then I'm not going to burn out. I'm going to be able to sustain this for the amount of time. Like I think it's going to take a few years of me doing this before I get to any kind of level that I'm happy with. So for me to be able to sustain that, I've got to it's got to be a process that I enjoy. So let's look at some more stats. So the number of cards I've got are 909. So you can see almost 3/4 of the cards are mature. That's in large part thanks to the fact that I basically took a month where I was literally just doing reviews. So you can see I'm almost at 1,000 cards, which is cool. My intervals seem reasonably balanced. There's this big dip here where I took a break and then it comes up again. My card eases are always 250 because I'm using the add-ons that force it to be 250. The times of the day when I do it, so with Anki, I've noticed that I have to do it as soon as I wake up. If I don't do it as soon as I wake up, then I'm basically procrastinating the whole day, putting it off, and I don't do any French basically until I've done it. So I try and get it done as soon as I wake up. So you can see, because my sleep pattern hasn't been great, so I had a few days where I had a good sleep pattern. This was when I was waking up, like at the beginning of the month most days. You can see as it's kind of drifted, as my sleeping pattern's got a bit worse. You can see this is the sort of time when I wake up now, and this is when I spend most of my time doing it. You can see it's kind of certain days it's drifted later on, and if it drifts later on, that correlates to days where I don't do much. So I'm being quite diligent now, and I'm making sure that I get my Anki done, because it only takes at max 25 minutes to do. So if I just get it out of the way in the morning when I'm eating my breakfast, like that seems to work much better for me. In terms of my stats, so I've got a 98% on recent cards that come up, and I've got a 98.97 on mature. So my stats seem pretty good. So the way that I review cards is everyone seems to have their own way of reviewing cards, but the way that I do it is I have to understand everything on that card. So it's not just the target word. I have to understand how it fits into the rest of the sentence, and I have to understand how every part of the sentence works. So if I forget any part of the sentence, I'll mark it down. I mean, that almost never happens because I only add cards where they're I+1, so I already know pretty well everything else in the sentence apart from that one thing. So I'm very particular in the cards that I add, so I don't really have that problem. And I haven't had any leeches yet. I've had no leeches. I've had no kind of problem cards, which is very surprising, because when I did Japanese, I would have a huge number of leeches. Like it would be 25-30% at least of the cards that I make once I've reviewed them a couple of times, like I just completely forget what the word means. Now, I don't really know why that happened with Japanese, and it hasn't happened with French, but I'm pretty happy. Once I've added a card in Anki, like I seem to just never forget it in the context of Anki. Like I have some days, if we go back, I had like a period here where I didn't forget anything. Like I had no failures for like basically like almost a week here, and I've had several periods where I've had several days where I just get everything right. And I never had that with Japanese. I always got at least one or two things wrong. So that's been quite surprising to me. And I mean, these stats will obviously start going down, especially mature, as I start getting longer and longer and longer interviews, like into the months, and then maybe into like over a year. I expect that will probably go down, but we'll see. I mean, I'm reading a lot. I'm getting a lot of exposure. So I've noticed that words tend to come up a lot more. Like it's a common kind of phenomenon where like when you learn a word for the first time, you suddenly start seeing it everywhere. So there's a particular phenomenon, I don't know what it's called, but that happens to me with most words that I learn. Like I'll suddenly start seeing them everywhere. So I tend to not forget them. Like unless it's a super rare word, then I tend not to forget it. So this cards added section, like I don't trust it at all. Like I think the main reason why this doesn't work is because a lot of the cards that I add are actually ones that I haven't created. I've just moved them from a different deck, and I don't think they get picked up here, so this isn't particularly accurate. So I don't really use this to count how many cards I've added, but even by this, which is an underestimate, you can see that's the average. The average is 13 cards a day that I've added, so that's pretty good. That's pretty consistent. My actual average is probably a little bit higher. It's probably 15 maybe that I've added, maybe even more, but that's pretty good, I think. So yeah, that's my stats. So now I'm going to show basically some like the ways that I've changed the way that I structure my cards a little bit. So I'm pretty settled on this format now. This is kind of the way that I'm going to do cards moving forward. It's a little bit different to how I was doing it before. So if I go to some of my so I don't want that one. Let's go to some of my more recently created cards. Let's say, so this is one from Harry Potter, for example. So what I'll do is I'll have obviously the sentence on the front, and then I'll highlight the word, and then I'll put the kind of the standard form if it's a verb on the back, and then I'll have the definition in French. So this is how I make most of my cards. So I go on, I use the Larousse dictionary, and I just stick them on a lingual dictionary on the back. And then I create a text-to-speech sound, and then usually what I'll do, let's find another one. So this is probably a slightly better one. I'll get the word sound from Forvo, and I'll stick that on as well. So I'll basically just copy the dictionary definition from Larousse. If there's any expressions, I might copy some different expressions. And then if it's a noun, for example, I usually won't have anything on the back. I'll literally just have a picture of the object. And if it's from like a game, I'll have a screenshot so that this takes me back to the time when I learned that word. And it makes it much more likely that I'm going to absorb the word, because I'll have linked it to the time when I learned it, if that makes sense. So I always stick these images. So this is a classic type of card that I will make now. I have cards that I've made from YouTube. So if I pick one from YouTube, so this is one from Hugo's channel. So I use subs to SRS, download the YouTube video, and then I have the native audio from the card. I have that's done by Morphman that will pick out the target, the word that I don't know apparently. And then I have an image of the video. So these are other good cards, subs to SRS cards that I use as well. So this is an example of a card that I've created from LingQ. So I've got the native audio from the LingQ, and I've copied it in, and then I've got the definition on the back. I do still have definitions in English. I'm not fully monolingual, so I'll go over my process. So let's say I didn't know what this word meant. So what I do is I've actually written a little script in Python. So I'll show that here. So this script took me maybe, I don't know, 15-20 minutes to write. So anyone that knows anything about Python will know that this is very, very easy to make. This is the entire thing. So all this does, if I run it, is it's basically using a package to detect hotkeys. If it detects that I press one of these particular hotkeys, it does something. So I've got one for this one for downloading YouTube videos. So all I have to do is I go on a particular YouTube video, I right click, I click copy URL, press Control Shift and Y, and then what it will do is it downloads the YouTube video and it sticks it in a folder with the subtitles file. So it's just a very quick, easy way for me to grab YouTube videos with the subtitle file already, and it puts it into a nice folder like based on author. And so that's one way. The main way that I use this, so now that I've got this running, I just leave this running all the time, so it's always checking for hotkeys. Let's say I didn't know this word, so what I do is I copy it. I make sure it's on my so if I go here, I just copy it, I make sure it's on my clipboard, and then I do the hotkey, which is Control Shift and F, and then what this does is this opens up Chrome, and it will search it in all of the things that I've told it to search for. So I always start with Larousse, because I always want to see if I can understand the monolingual. So a lot of the times what happens in Larousse is that you'll just get the word again. So this isn't that helpful to me, because it's like literally it's just got the same word in there. So this happens quite a lot with Larousse. So if this is the case, then I won't use this one. Then I'll go to the Collins one, and then, oh, okay, it means secondary school pupil. Okay, cool. So then I'll copy that and I'll stick it on the back of the card. And then once I've closed that, I've got the Forvo. So I've got the pronunciation, so I can copy that. And then if I want to find out more, I've got the Wiktionnaire page. This will tell me like more about like the history of the word, and it's more like a Wikipedia kind of page. So this is useful. If it's like a word, I'll often look through this. And then Reverso, just so that I can see like roughly how it's used in a bunch of different sentences. Sometimes like this will give slightly better understanding of what the word actually means rather than the dictionary definition. So that's what I'll do basically. I'll copy the sentence into Anki. I'll copy that. I'll do the hotkey, and then I'll go through and then I'll stick whatever definition on the back, and then whatever kind of word sound, like how the word sounds, I'll drag and I'll drop it in there. So that's how I create my cards now. If anyone wants this script, like literally if you know anything about Python, you can literally just copy it from here. But if there is any real desire for something like this, then I can stick it on a GitHub or something, but it really is pretty basic. So now in this section, I want to talk about how I felt it's gone over the last month, like how I felt I've improved, and how I felt that my French has got better over the last month. So let's have a look at how many cards I've got. So if I go on statistics, you can see last time I had 487 cards in Anki. Now I've got 909. So it's almost double. It's a little less than double the amount of cards, so around 450 in the month, which isn't too bad. Now let's look at how many my Morphman has increased. So you can see 2824 up here. If I look on the old video, it's 1429, so again it's around double. So I feel like in terms of Anki, I've added quite a lot of new cards, and I'm very happy with my progress in Anki. In terms of how I felt it's gone, so aside from the kind of the initial 3 to 4 weeks where I didn't really do anything, I've been pretty consistent since then. So I've had very few days where I've kind of dropped off. So I've managed to get myself into a sort of schedule, which I'm pretty happy with. So what I do is basically I wake up within an hour usually of waking up, like half an hour to an hour. I'll get breakfast and I'll load up Anki, and I'll make sure to do my reviews for the day. I'll get them out of the way nice and early first thing. Once I've done that, I like to move on typically to something which I'll consider like my kind of high focus study, like the closest thing that comes to study. So that'll be like reading things in LingQ, like intensively going through like a podcast episode in Link, or like trying to read a novel, like Harry Potter. So I don't always do that every day, but the days that I feel like I want to do that's what I'll do. That's what I'll start the day off by doing. So I'll typically read 1 or 2 lessons worth of a book, like Harry Potter, or I'll do 1 or 2 podcasts. So once I've done that, then I move on to my more like kind of casual things, which I'll do for most of the rest of the day, and that involves, for the most part, that's involved playing No Kuni. But I'm going to replace that with other things. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break for the next few days, maybe a week, because I'm pretty burnt out from playing so much of that game. But eventually I'm going to replace it with another game. I'm not sure which game yet, but it'll be another RPG, hopefully one with French voice acting, if I can find one, but that'll be what I spend most of my day. Aside from that, it'll be watching things, like I'll probably watch things in subtitles in this period. Like maybe I'll finish watching Vikings, or I'll watch a different show with subtitles on. So this is my kind of casual kind of just spending time with the language, where I don't have to be as focused. Like I'm still learning lots of things. This will probably be where I learn the bulk of my words, but I'm not really that interested in focusing too intently. I don't want it to be something that burns me out, but I still want to spend time with the language. So maybe I'll read some news, or I'll go on like YouTube, like French YouTube, or maybe French Twitch, or I'll just be doing something in French, and that'll take up the bulk of the day. And then when it gets time to go to sleep, at the moment, like maybe about 2 hours before sleep, after I've had dinner, I like to put on an episode of Breaking Bad, or 2, like 1 or 2 episodes of Breaking Bad, and that'll be without subtitles, so that'll be to get my listening practice up. Essentially, what I want to do is I want to slowly increase this. At the moment, it's very difficult for me to do this. Essentially, what I'm finding is that I learn almost all of my words through reading, and then my listening is kind of just a catch-up process. It's just, can I identify those words that I know by reading when I hear them? Like, am I at that point where I can instantly recognize them in any context when I'm listening? And most of the time it's no. So my comprehension when I'm reading is pretty high, depending on the content. If it's a book, it's quite a lot lower. I still do have to look at quite a lot of things, but if I'm playing like a game, or if I'm watching a YouTube video, or if I'm watching a TV show with subtitles, it's not as hard. Especially with the things that's going on in the background, I can usually tell what's happening, and I don't usually look anything up. With games, obviously, I was looking quite a lot of stuff up, because that was the bulk of how I was getting my I+1 sentences. But for the most part, I don't have to look that many things up. Like, a lot of the times I can tell what the words are through context. And the thing with No Kuni is that even though I've added, I can't remember how many cards into Anki, but I've learned several times that many cards as words just from picking them up from context, or just through looking it up and then not feeling like I want to make a card, but I've just remembered the word after that point. So just doing stuff in the language, like I don't need to add it to Anki to actually learn the word. And that's a weird thing, because then it's almost like, what's the point in Anki? And another thing that I've noticed is that I'll look up occasionally I'll find a sentence which I think is an I+1 sentence, and I'll be like, oh, okay, and then I'll look that word up in Anki, because I'll have some kind of feeling that I've seen that word before, but I don't know why. And then I'll see that I've got a mature card in Anki, or like a card that I added like a week or 2 ago for that word, and I'll be like, huh. And then when I look at the card, I'll instantly just recognize the word, and I'll know what it is in a different context. That doesn't happen to me too often, but it happens to me enough to where I'm like, so why am I using Anki then? If there's cards that I get right every time that are like moved into mature in Anki, but when they come up in actual immersion and I'm not recognizing them, then why am I using Anki? So that's been something that's been quite interesting to me. Like it really shows me that memorizing words doesn't really help you acquire them that much. But Anki is kind of like the driver to a lot of the things that I'm learning, so I'm still going to keep using Anki. It sets like the framework of what I'm doing, basically. So most of what I'm doing is hunting for I+1 sentences to basically plug into Anki. and that's helping me learn a lot of new words every day. And I think it is having some benefit. Like, it's definitely working with a lot of words. Like, there's a lot of words where I know that I specifically know that word because I know that I've got the card, and it takes me back to the time when I learned that word, and I see it in a different context, and I just instantly know, okay, you can use it like that now as well. So I think that's where Anki comes most useful, and it doesn't take up much time. So typically when I'm reviewing an Anki, it takes 15-20 minutes, and then actually adding the cards, like, I've got it down to a point where it takes me maybe no more than 30 seconds to add a card. So I'm really not spending that much amount of time with Anki, and I think it is good. I am getting a lot of benefit for the amount of time that I spend. I am getting a lot of benefit, and like I said, it is driving most of the rest of this process. So at least for the foreseeable future, Anki is going to be like the primary thing that I use. One thing that I've noticed as well is that I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed with I+1 sentences. Like, I'm in this particular period, like, I'm starting to kind of get over the hump now, but especially at the beginning of this month, like, I was just inundated with I+1 sentences. Like, if I'd added every single I+1 sentence for the day, I'd have added well over 100 cards a day, like 100, 200 cards a day, if I added every single I+1 sentence that I came across. So it's taught me to be a lot more picky. So I think that's why I haven't had any leeches, and I think that's why I feel like my cards I'm really attached to my cards. I really like them, and I actually, doing my Anki reviews is an enjoyable experience for me because I've been very selective of my cards. So I add probably 15 a day on average, out of, let's say, 1 to 200 potentials every day. So through this culling process, I think I'm only getting good cards, and then I am still, obviously, I'm looking up these extra words, so I am still learning things outside of Anki, but that whole process was overwhelming at times, where I would have far too many I+1s. In the beginning, I felt like I had to add every single one to Anki, but pretty soon on, I realized I had to be much more picky, and then now I'm really, really picky with the cards that I add, because I know there's no real pressure for me to add a particular card, because I think, well, it might come up in a better, like, it just doesn't feel right, like, this word might come up in a better circumstance where I'm more able to pick it up, and then if the word's worth learning, I'll say it again. So I don't get too attached to adding any particular word, really. I only add it when it feels right. So another thing that I wanted to talk about is basically where I get I+1 sentences from. So to illustrate this, I thought it'd be nice to draw like a really janky graph in Paint. So excuse my poor drawing skills in Paint. So let's draw some axes. Whoops. See, my Paint skills are pretty bad. So I've got the y-axis and I've got the x-axis. So on the x-axis, I've got, let's put difficulty. So this is kind of difficulty of content, and I'll explain more what that means in a minute. And then down here, I've got I+1. So I'll put that there. So I've got I+1 there. So this is going to represent how many I+1 sentences I get. So the higher this is, the more I+1 I get. And this is going to represent the difficulty of the content. So something that's really easy is like, let's say, something like Peppa Pig or like Dora the Explorer, or like very, very kid stuff. And then we've got more like, I don't know, like kind of children's kind of manga and stuff like that, like young, very like teenager kind of manga. And then we're going up into like here, which is like, let's say, most computer games and most like YouTube videos and things like that. And then we're getting into the more like sort of native speech and more like technical speech. And then down here we're getting like very, very technical, like super high level, like super hard books, like technical books, and like that's kind of what I mean by difficulty. It's like difficulty to comprehend, basically. And essentially what happens is the number of I+1 sentences tends to look a little bit like this. So if I draw a little curve, so in the beginning, like I get very little I+1 sentences when the difficulty is very low, and then what happens is it starts to come up like this, and then there's sort of like a peak here When the difficulty's just perfect is when I'm getting the most I+1. And then it starts to peter out a bit, and then when it gets too difficult again, it gets too hard. So it looks like a bell curve, basically. And so what this actually represents, if I draw another line, so if I put my level is somewhere around here, let's say. This is my level, maybe a little bit further this way. So this is my ability level. So this is where I'm comfortable at. So anything below here I can understand pretty much 100%, like close to 100%. Anything up here it's like maybe in the high 90s, and then as we get a little bit further on, like maybe here it's like 95, and then it starts to fall off a cliff, and then when I get a bit further on it gets into like the 80s and so, and then it's virtually incomprehensible here. So the thing that I've noticed is that I get the most I+1 sentences out of stuff that's a little bit too hard for me. Like if stuff's too easy for me, I still do get some I+1. So like the InnerFrench stuff, for example, is probably somewhere around here. It's probably right at my level. And I do still get a fair amount of I+1, and it's nice to kind of dip into this kind of content because it's much less effort. So the higher I get up here, the more effort it is for me to consume that content. So something that's down here, which is like if I'm watching like a reality show or something in French where there's lots of slang and stuff that I virtually don't understand, or I'm reading like a very difficult novel, then it's using up a lot of my energy and I'm not getting that much I+1 from it. I mean, there's still a lot of benefit here because I think it pushes my abilities much further, but I don't want to spend too much time here. I want to spend most of my time in this kind of area here, and this is where No Kuni's been for me. So it started out maybe like here, and then as I've done No Kuni more, it's kind of drifted this way, and I think that's kind of what's going to happen with most content. Is it's ideally I want it to start somewhere around here, and then as I spend more time with that content, I want it to kind of drift and drift and drift, and eventually it will hit the point where I understand nearly all of it, and then I can kind of like start dipping out of it. So InnerFrench, for example, I'm sticking with that because I really, really enjoy the content, and if I intently study it, I do get a lot of I+1 out of it, and it is worthwhile. So, and it gives you a lot of confidence as well. When I stay down in this section here, which I do for a few hours a day, it gives me a lot of confidence, and it really boosts, it gives me a lot of motivation to kind of delve into this more difficult content. So I hope this concept makes sense. This has been a big kind of thing for me. This like I don't want to force myself to just constantly read books that would be down here. I mean, I wouldn't be getting that many I+1. So when I did that with Le Petit Prince, I can't remember how many cards I made from Le Petit Prince, but it was probably 10 or 15 out of the entire book. Like I just wasn't adding hardly any. I got almost no I+1. They were all I+2, I+3. I mean, so there was some benefit to doing that, but it burned me out, and if I'd have done that, nothing but that, I would have quit by now. So it's useful for me to spend most of my time here because I feel like I'm getting the most kind of bang for my buck when I'm in this zone. And then I think it's still useful to spend some time down here just to kind of reinforce. I mean, I still am getting stuff out of it. I'm still spending time with French, which is very, very important. It just means that by flicking between these, I can spend a lot more time with French. And what I've realized is that content is way less important than the amount of time that I'm spending with French. So if I can spend 10 hours a day with French, but it's not exactly the most optimal content, then I'll be very, very happy with that. I'll feel like I get a lot out of that. And my results have shown like this is moving much, much further down my actual ability level. Like this curve is shifting. So the curve will shift. Like my peak will always be a little bit ahead of where my ability level is, but my ability is getting much, 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 much better all the time. And yeah, I'm very happy with this. So we're getting towards the end of the video now. This is most of what I wanted to talk about. I'm going to talk now about my goals for the future and what I want to be doing in terms of my French learning. Essentially, one thing that I've noticed from this month is that I don't think I'm spending enough time listening. So for me, reading is great because it's not that difficult for me. Like I can take my time with it. I can really feel the benefits that I'm getting out of it, and I can learn a lot of new things. Like I can really enjoy the content. With listening, because obviously I haven't done much of it, it's far less. Like it's like everything's much more muddy. It's like watching a film, like if you wear glasses, it's like I'm watching a film without my glasses on, for example. Like it's very hard for me to get into the content, and therefore I don't enjoy it anywhere near as much. So it's very hard for me to motivate myself to watch stuff without subtitles. So especially in the beginning, I'm only really going to do it with shows that I've seen before. So right now I'm doing it with Breaking Bad. I'm going to pick a bunch of other shows. Like I'm going to spend at least the first few 100 hours just rewatching shows that I've already seen, but without subtitles. And my goal is to basically do more of that than I have been in this last month. So when I say setting goals, so I'm not going to set... So I think at the end of the last video, like I set some goals where I was going to read, I don't know, one chapter of Yotsubato, or I was going to do this particular thing, or like I found that if I set myself these goals, I never ever make them. Like if I set myself direct specific goals, like I might not want to read that anymore. So like in the case of Yotsubato, the site that I was using went down, and then I couldn't find it anywhere else on the internet, so I had to effectively abandon it. But I mean, lots of things like that might happen. So I might be really into a particular piece of content one month, and then I might say, oh, okay, so I'm going to make sure that I do 2 episodes of this a day, every day. I'm going to set this rigid goal. But what's been much more helpful for me is just maximizing the amount of time that I spend in the language, rather than forcing myself into content every day. I've just been doing things in like whatever I wanted effectively in the language, and most of what I wanted to do was play this game, and I'm going to continue that. And probably most of what I'll do for the next month is play the next RPG, like maybe No Kuni 2, although I'm kind of a little bit burnt out from that world, so I'll pick some other game that I'm going to play, and then I'm going to kind of ease into this schedule that I talked about, where I do Anki in the morning, and then I read something in LingQ, and then I do like the bulk of like either reading manga or playing the game, or like watching TV with subtitles, and then I watch something without subtitles, and like that order isn't fixed. So once I've done my Anki, I might watch a couple of hours of something without subtitles, but I'm going to have these different modes that I do every day, and I'm just going to do it by how I feel. Like I'm not going to force myself to do particular things. The only thing that I might kind of motivate myself to do a little bit more is more listening without subtitles, because I don't want the gap between my listening ability to get too far away from my reading ability, because then, I mean, ultimately, most of when I'm speaking with someone, which is the end goal, I want to be able to speak fluently and have a conversation with someone. Like reading doesn't help me at all there. So I do need to make sure that I'm focusing on listening. So that's pretty much the only goal that I'm going to set myself for this next month. So in terms of how I'm going to structure this, I'm going to aim to do one a month, so I'm going to try and do another video this time next month. I've kind of settled into this schedule now, so I'm not really expecting the next video to be anywhere near as long. Hopefully I'm just going to talk through my stats. I'm just going to go through the type of content I've been watching, and then how I feel my level has gotten better. And that's mostly what these videos are going to be about in the future, rather than actual like nitty gritty of things that I've been doing. So I'm going to show like my LingQ stats, I'm going to show my Anki stats, and I'm going to talk about the things that I've done. That's going to be my aim in the future. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again next month.